dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WBDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. Let's get right to it. A lot of things going on in the country still, but at this point, we're past year one. So the question for me is, how is the nation responding to the Trump presidency? Let's take a look at three areas. Let's take a look at economically. Let's take a look at politically. Let's take a look at socially. Let's start with the economics. BBC, which is nobody's right-wing organization, news organization, put out a report on the 20th of January that says Donald Trump and the economy in 6 charts. Here's what they are bringing to your attention. Number one, the American economy is growing. For the last 2 quarters, it has grown at better than 3%. I believe it was 3.1% at the end of the second quarter, 3.2% at the end of the third quarter. Projections from the Atlanta Fed that I have seen says that the third quarter will, the fourth quarter of 2017 will also exceed 3%. Now, it's hard to find any point during the Obama administration where you had that, and Obama continues to be the only American president in history who had an 8-year term as president, and in not one of those years did the economy ever grow at a rate of 3% or higher. It never got to 3%. So, Donald Trump is seeing growth in the American economy. What has he done? He hasn't done anything. He hasn't passed any laws. Well, you don't have to pass laws for the American economy to grow. There's something called regulations. He has repealed a bunch of them. And once you regulations on an economy are like leash on a dog. If you let go, the dog's going to run. Simple as that. Regulations have been reduced. The economy is running. It is now more in the hands of the American people than it is in the hands of the American government. And every time that happens, the economy tends to grow. Number 2, stocks have had a record run. I'm not a big stock market guy, to be honest with you. And the reason I say that is not because I'm trying to diminish Donald Trump or poo-poo what happened under Barack Obama. It's just that since we went into the mode of printing money to finance this debt and keeping interest rates zero or close to zero so that we could, quote unquote, afford the interest, you have forced capital into the stock market because the banks don't pay anything. I don't think that the growth in the stock market is totally fairly evaluated. I just don't think so. Nevertheless, under Donald Trump, we have seen ridiculous growth in the stock market. Now, to be fair, we saw very, very strong growth in the stock market after Obama. It went from less than 10,000 to about 20,000, well, around at least 18,000 or so before Donald Trump took office. Now it is at 26,000 in a year. Pretty remarkable. I don't remember seeing the stock market grow at that type of a rate. But again, I'm not crazy about the stock market. Unemployment is falling. Right now it's at 4.1%. The lowest it's ever been recorded at is 3.9%. That was back in 2001. And it had peaked under Obama at about 10%. So it has been falling. And you can give credit to the Obama administration if you please regarding that. I do not, because I believe the U3 unemployment, which is what we are used to, even though there are 6 unemployment rates that are measured, I believe it's been manipulated. I'm not sure it's not being manipulated now under Donald Trump. But I do know that black unemployment is the lowest that's ever been recorded, and that is something to celebrate. Wages remain relatively flat. Now, they're higher now than they were under the Obama administration. Right now, they're about between 2.5 and 2.9%. I think the highest they ever got to after the recession was over under Obama was maybe 2.25%. Not much more than that. So it's higher, but it's not gangbusters. The job market, workers coming back to job market, we've leveled off at 63% labor force participation rate. That's not a good number. But under Obama, it had fallen to less than 62.5%, when before he took office, it was as high as 66. So now we're back at 63. It's an improvement, but a lot more things need to happen before we can say that America is really going back to work. Number 6, the trade deficit. This is something that Donald Trump has said something about. He made a deal about, or he made an issue regarding bad trade deals that the United States were involved in. But now, after a year of being in office, the trade deficit is getting worse. There have not been a lot of trade deals announced, of which I'm aware, trade deals. At the same time, this is kind of a victim of your own success. Consumer confidence is rising, and as a result, people are buying more stuff. The way the U.S. economy is currently constructed, if the consumer has more confidence, they're buying more things. They tend to be buying more things that are made outside the country. Until you start really revitalizing the American economy, as it looks like may happen under this president, the trade deficit's not going to move in a positive direction, at least not very much. Overall, with the economy, President Trump is presiding over an economy that is doing very well, better than that of his predecessor. It's that simple. What about politically? Politically, we're looking at something a little bit different. I'm going to go to Ballotpedia because I don't want the spin. I don't want the spin. Let's take a look. We do have some special elections. That's what I'm going to look at. Special elections to Congress. As of January 2018, there are 4 that are upcoming, and that's going to be in Pennsylvania in the 18th Congressional District in March, the 8th Congressional District in Arizona in April, Ohio's 12th District in August, and Michigan is going to have one on the 13th of November. I don't know why that's a special election. That's actually Election Day. But up until now, let's talk about special elections. The ones that have been announced. Well, now I understand. The Michigan 13th, that's actually John Conyers' district, and he is being he's already out, but they decided not to fill that district. It is basically not being represented by anybody right now. There is no representative. That's not going to happen until November 6th. There'll be a primary in August, but oh well. Here are the special elections that have already occurred while Donald Trump is president. The 4th District in Kansas, it was won by a Republican. It wasn't a change. Montana, there's only one congressional district in Montana, and that was won by Greg Gianforte after he beat up a reporter. That was also not a change in party. California's 31st was won by Jimmy Gomez, a Democrat, and he replaced a Democrat, Javier Becerra. Georgia, 6th congressional district, used to be Tom Price, who was the HHS secretary until he got himself jacked up with some private plane nonsense and was fired from his position or resigned. That, after the Democrats poured more money into that congressional campaign than any campaign in history, was won by the Republican Karen Handel. South Carolina's 5th was a Republican district, which was won by another Republican. Jeff Sessions' old Senate seat was won by Doug Jones, a Democrat, after a just ridiculous campaign smearing Roy Moore, who is a former, I believe, Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice, calling him a pedophile. No proof of that. Matter of fact, those who have called him that, some of them have been pretty much debunked. Also in Utah's 3rd district, you have Jason Chaffetz, who left the House, and he was replaced by John Curtis, another Republican. So out of all those elections, 7 elections, I have 5 won by Republicans and 2 won by Democrats, and the only change in party was in the Senate seat in Alabama. That doesn't look like a big move from the status quo, and definitely not a big move toward the Democrat Party, even though they are claiming now that they're getting such things. That's what's going on. Now, there's also other elections that went on. There's the governor's race in Virginia, which was won by a Democrat, even though the numbers, the margin of victory was smaller than it had been in the previous race for governor, which was also won by a Democrat. And much was made about that. Here is the problem you have to look at. Since 2009, the Republican Party has been, no, let me change that. It's not the Republican Party that's doing anything. The American electorate is eviscerating Democrats and removing them from office. There were only 22 Republican governors in 2009. Now there's 34. There were only, if I remember correctly, 39 state legislative bodies. There are 99 in the United States, either the state assembly and the state senates. There are 99 of them total in these 50 United States. In 2009, 39 of them were controlled by the Republican Party. It's 67 now. As for the House and the Senate, we've got to remember when Barack Obama was elected and inaugurated, he walked into a more than 70-plus seat margin, Democrats in the House. That was the majority in the House for the Democrats. There was a majority in the Senate, depending upon how you counted the independents who always caucus with the Democrats. They had a filibuster-proof 60-40 margin in the Senate. My, how things have changed. Democrats today in the Senate, how many of them are there? There's only 49, from 60 down to 49. And the Republicans have gone from 40 to 51. The Republicans now hold the majority in the House. The Democrat Party lost more than 1,000 elected seats at the state and federal level under Barack Obama. There's nothing in the special election results to date to indicate that the nation has changed its mind about the Democrat Party. And that's the problem for the Democrats. So how are we a year into the Trump presidency when it comes to politics? Simply put, the Democrats continue to bleed. What about socially? let me just make this really clear. What I see is an exorcism. There is this strange notion in the minds of progressives that they represent the majority of thought in America. They do not. They never have. When Richard Nixon called out a silent majority back when he was running for president the second time, it was real. And the election was not even close. The United States of America is a center-right country. You keep hearing things from the progressives that that the whites are dying out. They're still 65% of the population, as much as 2/3 of the population, in some cases even 70% of the population, depending upon what numbers you use. They're not going anywhere. But you've heard all this about progressives taking over and resisting and doing all this, and the problem is they are not piercing the silent majority. The silent majority is not just white. It's predominantly white because the doggone nation is predominantly white. Let's be real. And what you're seeing now in this country actually heartens me because it means real debate is back. What do I mean by that? I am seeing people who are not considered a minority. I'm seeing white people go out, and particularly on social media and other forums, and say, you know what? We're tired of being told that we're bad people just because certain minorities don't like what happened in history, even before we were born. They want to hold us accountable for what people we never met did to people that the black folks didn't even know. Only 6% of the nation ever owned slaves. And almost 40% of the nation can count their ancestry, trace it back to Ellis Island, which didn't even open until after slavery had been eradicated. So please explain to me why these white people would continue to listen to this nonsense about how they're responsible for centuries of what they did not do. And they're starting to speak up about it. Why is that a good thing? It means the debate is joined and there's a chance at honesty. And progressives do not want honest debate because that means we bring in historical things that can be verified. And once you start doing that, the history and the brutality and the soullessness and the moral bankruptcy of the progressive movement that is now resident in the Democrat Party comes to the floor. They don't want that. I guarantee you they don't want that. So how is the nation responding to the Trump presidency? Economically, they're stronger. Politically, they're continuing on a trend of removing progressives, particularly Democrats, from elected office. Socially, more voices, not fewer, are coming to the fore, and the silent majority is becoming slightly less silent. All of this bodes well for the campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." All of it does. And that's the problem for progressives. Because the greater America becomes, the less their voice will be heard. And they got a problem with that, trust me. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the Dominant Force of Internet Conservatism, Talking America Radio. Also, WBDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Austin, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's take a little walk down government shutdown memory lane. Since the Congressional Budget Control Act of 1974, Congress has failed to authorize funding of the government, federal government, on 18 separate occasions. One of them happened under Gerald Ford, 5 happened under Jimmy Carter, 8 happened under Ronald Reagan, Bush 41 had a single shutdown. Bill Clinton had 2 shutdowns during his administration. The government was never shut down during George W. Bush's administration. Once it was shut down under the Obama administration, and now we have one shut down under the Trump administration. So, how do we go through this? Let's talk about this. The first shutdown happened when the Democrats had a filibuster-proof 24-seat majority in the Senate and a 147-seat majority in the House. President Ford vetoed a funding bill for the Departments of Labor and Health, Education, and Welfare. Since then, that's become the Departments of Education and HHS separately. Now, the Democrats overrode his veto. They had the votes, but it took them 11 days to come up with a continuing resolution to fund the government. They had a they could have voted for anything they wanted. They had twice as many members in the House and a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and they couldn't get. Now, nevertheless, the Republicans suffered, I guess you could say that, because, remember, Gerald Ford was only president so he could pardon Richard Nixon. That is my view. Let's go on to the Carter administration. You had 5 during that time, and for all of the presidency of Jimmy Carter, you had Democrat running the House, Democrat running the Senate, and you had Democrat as president. So they ran everything. There were 5 government shutdowns, and every one of them had something to do with the fact that Democrats in the Senate wanted to use public money to fund abortions under Medicaid. That's what they were willing to go to the mat for, and they did it 5 times. Now, the interesting thing about that is after enough of that foolishness and one term of Jimmy Carter, he was gone. Now, were the shutdowns the only reason? No. But when people talk about leadership, and Donald Trump is being taken to task for his comments about Barack Obama in 2013, please explain to me how you lack the presidential leadership to keep people from fighting over whether or not we're going to use public money to kill children in the womb. You can't manage that. Got it. And he suffered. 1 term and done. Ronald Reagan shut the government down 8 times. And he started the practice of actually furloughing workers so that the government would feel the pain and that congressional people would feel the pain of what they were doing. He was terrible. Okay. He also won a 525 vote re-election. Now, government was divided for the most part during the Reagan administration. You had a Republican president. You had a Republican Senate, but you never had a Republican House of Representatives. As a matter of fact, the Democrats actually took over the Senate after the 1986 midterms. So you had divided government then. You had 8 shutdowns. And in the middle of that, Ronald Reagan went out and won 525 of 538 electoral votes in a re-election campaign. Government ran, now I'm not going to say it ran smoothly, not with a shutdown every year on average. But the Democrats didn't fare well because the one thing they would have loved to have seen was Ronald Reagan removed. They didn't get that. Afterward, you go into the Bush 41 administration. And that came down to the president wanted, a continuing resolution in 1990 that did not come, or that did come with a plan to reduce the deficit. He said he'd veto anything that didn't show a plan to reduce the deficit. The House tried and failed to override his veto, and a shutdown ensued in which millions of workers were furloughed. House and Senate agreed to a joint budget resolution outlining a declining deficit, and Bush signed it. But the problem here, Democrats should have suffered for that. The reason they didn't is because of the president. Read my lips, no new taxes. That blew up in his face, as it should have, and he was removed. There was also a recession that helped him out the door. Bill Clinton had two. In 1995, the House and Senate sent Clinton a continuing resolution to increase Medicaid premiums, roll back environmental regulations, and balance the budget within 7 years. Clinton vetoed that. Government went into shutdown. It ended with a deal among the three leaders, Newt Gingrich in the House, Bob Dole in the Senate, and Bill Clinton, agreeing to fund the government at 75% levels for 4 weeks. And that gave them the opportunity to negotiate a bigger deal. 800,000 employees were furloughed. Here's the interesting thing: when Ronald Reagan started the process, the practice, of furloughing government workers doing shutdowns, he did that during 3 of the 8 shutdowns. That's something that seems to have carried forward ever since. Bear that in mind. December of 1995. Remember, after 1994, the contract with America was in effect. And for the first time in like 40 years, the GOP controlled both the House and Senate. Hadn't seen that before. But in December of 95, you had a 1-month shutdown. And that was all about whose forecasts were going to be used to predict the deficit and the budget. Seems a bit silly to me. You go a month on that. And you could make the argument that since the government was controlled, the legislative branches of government were controlled by the Republicans, that they should have paid a price for it. No, they got that majority from the Democrats after the 1994 midterm elections, and they kept it for a dozen years. They were in the majority until 2006, despite the shutdowns during the Clinton administration. As I said, George W. Bush didn't have anything go on during his administration, except the the national debt increasing by about 50%. Let's remember that. No shutdowns. And as you had no shutdowns, the national debt increased by nearly half. And oh, by the way, the Democrats won back majorities in the House and the Senate in 2006. Now, Obama had one shutdown in 2013. The Republicans were looking for lower levels of discretionary spending and demanding that they should delay implementation of Obamacare by a year. Okay. And they were blamed for shutting down the government. And they deserved the blame, if you will, for shutting down the government. They took a stand on what they thought was principle. And they said, we'd rather shut the government down than not get lower levels of discretionary spending and funding Obamacare at the levels that you want. Of course, John Boehner, the great chaise lounge that he was, folded after 17 days. But this was after, interestingly enough, almost 40% of the federal workforce was furloughed. And now we are where we are now. What happened as a result of that? Because the Republicans were clearly to blame for the shutdown under Barack Obama. Clearly their fault. Now, they had already won back the majority in the House of Representatives back in 2010 midterm because of Obamacare. Obamacare has never been popular among the American people. That's the interesting lie, or the dirty little secret that progressives won't tell you. You passed Obamacare, and you turned a 70-plus seat majority in the House into a minority. The same year you passed Obamacare. In 2013, you had the shutdown. Republicans were clearly to blame. But guess what? They took control of the Senate the very next year. What's the message from all this, by the way? Shutting down the government is a terrible thing. A terrible thing for Democrats to do. It doesn't work out for them politically. And even when you get into looking at the principles that are at stake behind them, you cannot see where Democrats are standing up for the benefit of the American people. They simply have an agenda item. 5 shutdowns of the government so that you could find a way to use Medicaid dollars to fund abortion. That's what you did. Shutting down the government so that you could fully fund the implementation of a law that was so unpopular with the American people, they eradicated a 70-plus seat majority in the House for the Democrats and gave that majority over to the Republican Party. So, we're looking at a shutdown that we're currently in. They may end that. Normally, shutdowns don't last that long. Bottom line, the majority of shutdowns last less than 10 days. Some of them only lasted the weekend, so that nobody would really feel the effects. Personally, I hope this one goes on for a while. Because of the issue, the current one, I hope it goes on for a while. Because I want the American people to take a good hard look at the why regarding it and see if they're still really in agreement with whether or not this ever should have happened in the first place. Now, for me personally, you're not going to hurt my feelings by shutting down the federal government. No, I do not work for the federal government. I think too many people do work for the federal government. I think we should reduce the federal workforce by a significant amount and not hurt the country. How do I know that? We've had furloughs, significant furloughs of American government workers, federal workers, in a number of the shutdowns. As a matter of fact, that has happened 7 times that you've furloughed a significant number of federal government workers. Has the country fallen apart? Did the government fail to operate? Was it a big deal when they came back? Did things just kind of go back to normal? You have more people working for the federal government than you need. So this history shows us some things about what goes on in D.C. The Democrats are agenda-driven. They're not national welfare-driven. They're not. The Republicans, when they force things, they're forcing things on certain principles. You may not agree with those principles. But the idea that discretionary spending should be less, is that a bad thing? I don't think so. The idea that a law that was not popular with the American people should not be fully funded, is that a bad thing? I don't think so. In all these cases, you could say that they were siding with the American people. The American people do not like the level of government spending that we have. They don't. But the Democrats always find a way to borrow more money so that they can spend on their objectives. Should that continue? I don't think so. But so far it does. We're going to see how this plays out in this next one. We'll talk a little bit about that next segment. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin. Be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.com. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, WJHC, Talk 107.5 in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. So I talked about the history of government shutdowns. There have been 18 up until now. But now we have the current shutdown, which I find just fascinating. And there's a lot of stuff swirling around about whose fault it is and this, that, and the other. And much is being made of what then business tycoon Donald Trump had to say about the 2013 shutdown, which was the last government shutdown prior to the beginning of his own administration. This is what Donald Trump had to say back in 2013 regarding the shutdown as it was approaching that would ultimately occur.
Who's getting fired? Who's going to bear the brunt of the responsibility if indeed there is a shutdown of our government?
Well, if you say who gets fired, it always has to be the top. I mean, problems start from the top, and they have to get solved from the top, and the president's the leader, and he's got to get everybody in a room, and he's got to lead. You know, the interesting thing is in 25 years and 50 years and 100 years from now, when the government is, you know, when they talk about the government shutdown, they're going to be talking about the President of the United States. Who was the president at that time? Mm-hmm. They're not going to be talking who the head of the House was, the head of the Senate, who's running things in Washington. So I really think the pressure is on the president.
That was Donald Trump back in 2013, that the president was at fault. He had failed to lead, and what he should do about that. Is that a fair criticism? When you remember that Barack Obama was famous and even got complaints from Democrats for his unwillingness to meet with anybody during his administration. He didn't even meet with them. It is a fair criticism. Is it a fair criticism of now Donald Trump? It's a fair observation, but here is the difference. In 2013, where was the meeting between Barack Obama and anybody? When did he get into a room with more than one person? Maybe he got into a room with John Boehner, but he wouldn't talk to anybody else, and that really wasn't a discussion. It was basically come kneel before Zod, and when Boehner said he really couldn't do that, and eventually he did anyway, Barack Obama didn't want to talk. I just find this interesting. Donald Trump did not fail to lead on this. Let me say why. Because let's remember, this is a shutdown over illegal immigrants. That's what this is. Donald Trump, when he said that he was going to sunset DACA, he told Congress, I'm giving you 6 months to come up with legislation and put it on my desk. They failed. They just failed. Absolutely. How is that not leadership? Hey, guys, I'm going to put this on you. Recently, he said, I'll sign whatever you give me. Just bring me something. I have yet to see any legislation pass either house of Congress. Not the House, not the Senate, nothing. 6 months he gave them. 6 months he pleaded. 6 months, and he's even saying, I'll sign anything. Just come up with something. Now, of course, we have the excuse that the Democrats are trotting out now that, well, we had a meeting and Durbin says he was the only Democrat in the room, which may or may not have been true. That depends on how you consider Lindsey Graham. I don't know if I think he's a Democrat anyway, but where the comment is allegedly made by, or the charge is made by Dick Durbin, that the president referred to certain countries with a very vulgar term. Nobody to date except Dick Durbin has said that the president used that term. Everything else is innuendo. Only Dick Durbin is out there calling countries by that vulgar name, and he's paying no price for it, by the way. He just every time you can shove a microphone in his face at 3 o'clock in the morning, he will call Haiti and Nigeria and other African countries fecal voids. He'll do it, not a problem, and he pays no price. He assigns that to Donald Trump, and people want to believe it, which is interesting to me. I don't get it. But despite Donald Trump giving them a deadline, giving them 6 months to figure something out and bring it to him so he can sign it and put DACA to bed, despite Trump getting into a room with different people, at least one Democrat and Republicans, and talking about immigration and trying to come up with a deal, I think that is an effort to show leadership. It's more than you got out of Barack Obama on Obamacare. It's more than you got out of Barack Obama on almost anything. And despite all that, this is what Donald Trump had to say in December about the likelihood that we would be where we are today.
You still have confidence in $1 sir?
Thank you very much.
We're going to have a shutdown, Mr. President.
It could happen. The Democrats are really looking at something that is very dangerous for our country. They are looking at shutting down. They want to have illegal immigrants, in many cases, people that we don't want in our country. They want to have illegal immigrants pouring into our country, bringing with them crime, tremendous amounts of crime. We don't want to have that. We want to have a great, beautiful, crime-free country. And we want people coming into our country. But we want them to come on our basis. And that's why we're being so careful with our process and our screening. And as you know, we had a tremendous victory the other day in the Supreme Court with the ban. Got quite a bit of attention, probably not as much of attention as it deserved. We had tremendous, that was a tremendous victory for this country. Not a victory for me, it was a victory for our country. So the Democrats maybe will want to shut down the country because they want people flowing into our country. And I want people coming into our country, but I want to vet those people, and I want to vet them very carefully because we don't want to have radical Islamic terrorism in this country, and we don't want to have crime in this country.
So tell me which position sounds more reasonable. I want people to come. I want to know who they are. I want to vet them because I don't want Islamic terrorism and I don't want crime coming into the country. Why would he say that? Look at Europe. Look at Northern Europe, where women were told to wear wristbands to tell Muslim immigrant men not to rape them. Interesting. Look at France and Germany and other European countries, Western European countries, because the Eastern Europeans had enough sense to say, y'all ain't coming in here, where they have established no-go zones where local police are fearful to go in, and they advise local residents, citizens of the country, to stay out of these areas. Donald Trump doesn't want that here. We actually have that here to some extent, but he's looking to not have that continue here. Is he wrong for that? I dare say no. And now Democrats are doing their best, progressives really, doing their best to blame this shutdown of the government on Donald Trump. Let's remember the shutdown really doesn't mean anything, except politically. More than anything else, a government shutdown shows people what side the politicians are on. Now, here's the interesting thing to me regarding this. On the 20th of January, you heard this from Chuck Schumer as he's looking to lay the blame. Now, remember, Chuck Schumer went out and told people, his caucus, that they should not vote to fund the government unless they have gotten a deal from the president on DACA, on illegal immigration. And this is what he's saying now.
So here we are on the first anniversary of the president's inauguration, mired in the Trump shutdown. It doesn't have to be this way. We can get big things done. We can fund the military at the highest level ever. We can commit unprecedented resources to the fight against opioids, to our veterans, to pension plans that are drying up. We can protect our southern border and protect young Americans who were brought here as children. We can pass children's health insurance. And I've never seen something so cynical as Republicans pitting groups of children against each other. They hold up CHIP to hold other children, these time the DACA kids, hostage. That's a disgrace. That's not what America wants. We can also pass disaster aid, which Texas, California, Florida, and Puerto Rico want. We can do big things, but the president needs to step up and lead. The Republicans control the presidency, the Senate, the House. They know who's responsible. The American people know that the Republicans control the presidency, the Senate, and the House, and they know who's responsible. America knows this is the Trump shutdown. Only the president can end it.
Please explain to me how the president can end something when it requires votes in the House and Senate and the president cannot vote. Please explain to me how this is setting one group of kids against another, one group of children against another, when the children for which you advocate the shutdown are not even Americans. Think about that. You are pitting illegal immigrant children, Mr. Schumer, against their interests against the interests of American children, and saying that they are somehow equal in the view of the American people. They're not. to shut down the government, the federal government, in order to push that agenda. How do you justify that? Oh, wait a minute. I want to know how Chuck Schumer justifies what he's saying now in light of what he said in 2013 leading up to the government shutdown that occurred in that year. This is what he said in 2013.
There was a hard line saying, unless I get my way, I'm going to shut the government down. I'm going to risk default for the nation. Now, anyone can do that. I believe in immigration reform. What if I persuaded my caucus to say I'm going to shut the government down? I'm going to not pay our bills unless I get my way. It's a politics of idiocy, of confrontation, of paralysis.
That was Senator Chuck Schumer talking to me in 2013. It was a little thing we call The Lead that runs during the week, and a slightly different message than what we're hearing from him today.
Slightly different. So what he called the politics of idiocy is what he has trotted out today. That's what he wants to do now. In The Hill, an opinion piece appears on the 21st of January. And it says Schumer's shutdown, because people are correctly seeing this as Schumer's shutdown, reveals Democrats are willing to destroy America just to spite Donald Trump. I disagree with that headline partly. But it reads, Donald Trump was inaugurated 1 year ago after promising to make America great again. Throughout the campaign, everyone knew what he believed, though it was not clear what his opponent stood for. That is why Hillary Clinton lost. No one knew what she stood for. They knew she was crooked. They knew about her emails. They knew about how she had cheated Bernie Sanders. They didn't know what she stood for except she wanted to be president. But there was no way to tell what that was going to mean for them. Donald Trump laid out a clear agenda by comparison. You did have a choice, and Donald Trump was chosen. But now the Schumer shutdown, if you hear those comments, that reveals exactly the totality of the Democrats' agenda. Animosity and amnesty. Animosity against the president and amnesty for illegal immigrants. What is this thing about really? Because it's not really animosity against the president. It's animosity against the American nation. When you would shut down the government so that you could take good care of people who do not belong to the country at the expense of the children and the citizens and the veterans and the military families who make up, fund this government, and take care of the American people, that says a lot about you, Mr. Schumer, Mr. and Ms. Democrat, who's in support of this. This isn't about DACA. This is about the American people. Why are we talking about immigration? You say in 2013 we shouldn't hold this up. Now you're saying you are claiming illegal immigrant children as American children. Why? Because the Democrat Party wants illegal immigrants to vote. They're going to find a way to get them in the country any way they can. We already know that they vote in elections in this country. They want to increase their numbers because they have a very simple agenda. If we help you into the country, you, of course, owe us a debt, wink, wink, and we're going to let you vote. We're going to give you benefits. We're going to give you public assistance. And when you go to the polls, remember who got you here and who got you the money, wink, wink, vote accordingly. They don't want people to come into the United States through the normal method. Because it doesn't matter where people come from if they come through the naturalization process. They can come from Mexico, they can come from Guatemala, they can come from Nigeria, they can come from Central African Republic, they can come from the moon. You go through the naturalization process and you are telling the world that I want to be an American. I want to be of these people. I want to be of their values, and I want to share the allegiances that they have. The Democrat Party is against that. Schumer said the American people know. The truth is they do. And that's really the problem. Politico, back in December, voters warn against a government shutdown. A majority of voters think Congress should avoid shutting down the federal government. 63%. Avoid a government shutdown at all costs. Why didn't you do that? Few voters see immigration as worth shutting down the government. Only 20% of voters say it is definitely worth shutting down the government in order to secure funding to build a wall. 25% say it would be definitely worth shutting down the government in order to grant protection from deportation to DACA. 25%. Oh, this same poll showed that Donald Trump's approval rating has moved up to 45% from 43%. This was back in December. So his numbers are going up, and nobody wants the government shut down, and only 1 in 4 people think that shutting down the government for illegal immigrants is a good thing. So what are the implications for this, for the midterms? So the Democrats went out, and we all know what they did, and we know why they did it. You shut down the government because you were not getting what you wanted for illegal immigrants. You refused to pay military families their pay. You furloughed workers. You cut off seniors from whatever benefits they were getting. You cut off the young children who were getting the CHIP program. You did all that to take care of children who are not even Americans. And you think that's good. You've already been going through 8 years of almost unprecedented bloodshed at the polls for the Democrat Party. You've lost more than 1,000 seats. If you think taking sides with foreigners against Americans is going to get them to vote for you, let me help you. No, it won't. If you win, it will only be because you will have continued the same voter fraud that got you a popular vote victory in the 2016 election. You will continue the type of voter fraud that put Al Franken in the Senate to begin with. You will continue the type of voter fraud that is probably why Doug Jones narrowly beat Roy Moore. A lot of people showed up in Alabama on election day that weren't from Alabama. There are counties who had more ballots cast than registered voters. Wonder how that happens. And if that occurs, because it very well could, the American people don't like being treated like fools. But you've already announced to them that you don't really care about them. You care about who you want the country to become more than who you understand the country to be. With that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards. And after this, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
One of the annual sources of great pride for the citizens of Detroit is the North American International Auto Show, where the world's leading automakers and high-tech companies converge in the former motor capital of the world. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, the 2018 edition of the North American International Auto Show is chock full of exciting new automobiles, like the Hyundai Velociter. The Ford Motor Company is on the muscle with a new 300-horsepower Mustang that moves like the wind. The mood among most automakers is very upbeat. Everyone I spoke with told me how relieved they are now that the crippling regulations along with corporate tax rates are reduced enough to allow American corporations and small businesses to be more competitive and innovative. This year's auto show press week opened on Martin Luther King Day and seemed to reflect the positive message of Dr. King, who emphasized working together and creating opportunities, etc. But true to form, a gaggle of leftist officials and community activists pretended to want to conduct a celebration of Dr. King. But what occurred was an embarrassing time of bashing President Trump and all Americans who want to protect our borders. Thank goodness most of the international media outlets ignored the madness. Unfortunately, the Dragon Media American outlets reveled in that hot mess. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man
Stanley
Thinkin.
Levy, Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking. Internet, conservative, TalkAmericaRadio.com. Also WDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, the fight against sanctuary cities may finally be joined. And the reason I say that is we do have reports coming out that indicate that the Trump administration is ready, or is at least considering, subjecting state and local officials to criminal charges if they implement or enforce so-called sanctuary policies that bar jurisdictions from cooperating with immigration authorities. Immigration advocates argue such a move would be illegal. Stop. How can holding someone criminally liable for violating federal law be illegal? Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen made the disclosure Tuesday during a Senate committee hearing on the department's operations. The DOJ is reviewing what avenues might be available. The context of this is, of course, not only putting ICE officers at risk, but also finding an efficient and effective way to enforce immigration law. She said it's safer for immigration agents to do their jobs if they have the assistance of state and local jurisdictions. That's kind of obvious. For example, if you have someone already in custody who is here illegally and subject to federal immigration law, it makes sense for ICE to come and pick them up while you already have them in custody, rather than hump them down in the community at large, where being armed, because some of these people are armed and dangerous, they risk hurting officers, they risk hurting other citizens, they even run the risk of hurting themselves. Why would you want to do that? The Justice Department's review follows a chilling warning from Acting Director of ICE, Thomas Homan, who said California would feel the wrath of his agency because of his decision to become a sanctuary state. Think about that for a minute. Because we just had the trial in which the gentleman who killed Kate Stanley walked. And he never said he didn't kill her. They came up with some thing about, well, it was accidental and whatever. Guy had already been deported 5 times. He had no business being anywhere within the borders of the United States. So now he's here and he kills people. So you also have the numerous accounts of drunk drivers, illegal aliens who kill people, should never have been in the country, didn't have a license. They couldn't have had a license. Who's going to give somebody who drives drunk a license and they're not even citizens? Who does that? Oh, well, California might. The whole point with this is the only way you deal with lawlessness is to enforce law. What you also need to understand is where progressives hide their lawlessness is in plain sight as public officials. Your number one example, Bill and Hillary Clinton. Bill Clinton is a sexual predator of Olympic proportions. Nobody does dirt the way Bill Clinton does dirt. Nobody. Let's just be clear on that. And he's been doing it for decades. He got thrown out of Oxford for sexual assault of a young woman in the UK. That's why he was only there for 1 year. They got him out of the country. That was 1969. He's been at it ever since. And because he was a governor and had state troopers at his beck and call, he got away with it. When he became president, he had Secret Service, got away with it. And it's not, put it this way, Bill Clinton's sexual assault history and proclivity is no less of an open secret than that of Harvey Weinstein. But Harvey got punished. Bill Clinton got rewarded because he's a public official. Hillary Clinton violated federal law, and she just happened to have somebody on the payroll in the person of Jim Comey as director of the FBI who indicted her publicly right before he said he would refer no charges against her. What does this have to do with sanctuary cities and sanctuary states? Because that's what California has become now. The progressive ideology says once we have power, we are above law. We only have to obey those laws that agree with our ideology. We are simply going to tell you that our position is morally superior, and therefore our superior morality makes legality immaterial. That's what they've done with sanctuary policy. We don't think it's right. We don't think anyone should be called illegal. We don't think that they're illegal. They're undocumented. Undocumented Americans. It's a lie. It is a flaunting of law, and in case you do not recall this, the United States is a nation of laws, not of men. Progressives want to undo those laws so that you will look upon their person as superior men and accept their views and their ideology as being more valid than law. Back to acting ICE Director Thomas Homan. He called for local and state officials to be charged with federal crimes for adhering to sanctuary policies. We got to take sanctuary cities to court. We got to start charging some of these politicians with crimes. The only way you will break the progressive mindset, the only way you will break the progressive ideological chokehold on cities like Chicago, on states like California, and other cities and municipalities and counties who have adopted this lawlessness, is you're going to have to perp walk some people and convict them. Only when they are convicted. I'm not saying charged. It doesn't matter if they're charged, because if they're charged and find a way to be acquitted, you will simply have validated their position. When they were illegal from the beginning, they are textbook, black and white, wrong. The Trump administration in general, and Attorney General Sessions in particular, are accountable for this lawlessness. They have called it out. They have tried to play nice. I have no idea why they ever tried to play nice. The one thing you never do with a progressive, and this is why I get in trouble with some people, say you're so disrespectful. I don't have respect for positions that dishonor me as an American citizen. I don't have respect for positions that discount me as a citizen of this country in favor of someone who is not a citizen of this country. I will not take a back seat in my own house to an uninvited guest. That is what progressives want you to do if they decide that the uninvited guest has merit, they will make them more important than you. They will make your life worthless. Ask the Stanley family. They will make your children less important than the children of foreigners. They will take your money that you work hard for, tax it away from you, and give it to those who do not work, who are not born here, who are not naturalized, who have no allegiance to the United States, no concern for our laws, and don't give a rat's behind about you. These are the same people receiving protection and even public assistance in the United States that take to the streets with foreign flags protesting their right to be here. And we have United States elected officials at the city, at the state, at the county levels who applaud this, who sue the federal government when the federal government says, you know what, if you're not going to follow federal law, you don't get federal money. And they sued. And a federal judge, not surprisingly, an Obama appointee, I don't even know if he was an Obama appointee. Let me not put that in the atmosphere. A wrong-thinking federal judge actually said that even though you violate federal law, you are entitled to federal money. Now let's give him the benefit of the doubt and suggest that the Trump administration went about this in the wrong way. Then what they should be doing is, if you want to shut down the government over immigration, this is something to do it over. Americans are being harmed. Some are dying because there are people in this country who are elected officials who basically will not enforce federal immigration law and will allow dangerous illegal immigrants to remain in this country to harm American citizens. We should not give another dime. And if it means we shut down the federal government until you agree that federal grants to cities for law enforcement should be governed by different rules than they are right now, to give us the ability to withhold those funds from sanctuary cities, then we need to shut the government down. That would be something to see. That would be an American debate worth having. Should the government be shut down partially, or I totally shut the whole thing down, until Congress writes appropriations rules and law and legislation that takes away federal law enforcement grant money from cities, from states, from counties who do not cooperate with federal immigration law. I, for one, would say that's a righteous shutdown. That's a righteous shutdown. Just like back in the 70s, even though the Democrats had ridiculously large majorities, it was a righteous shutdown to keep Medicaid money from being used to perform abortions, to fund them. That was a righteous shutdown. I should not be using tax dollars taken from the American people to kill those who would be American citizens. In this case, I would be saying something very similar. I should not be giving any money to those who do not protect American citizens when it is their job to do so. My question really comes down to, are we ever going to get anything more than lip service about this? I'm just curious. You've been talking about it for a while. Lawsuits have been going back and forth. All this Russia nonsense that everybody knows is a crock. When you know this is going on, you have court cases, you have all kinds of evidence, you have all kinds of documentation to demonstrate that this is happening and that people are being harmed, and you have yet to bring any charges against anyone. Or, failing that, you have yet, Speaker Ryan, where are you? Why are you not making sure that the laws governing the appropriation of federal law enforcement grants make sure that those who practice sanctuary policies cannot sniff a penny. Well, it's because immigration advocates said charging local or state officials with crimes for not cooperating with federal immigration laws would be unlawful and a violation of the Constitution. Really? This is from the American Civil Liberties Union, Cecilia Wang. She said these are really troubling intimidation tactics by the Trump administration. If they're threatening to prosecute state and local officials, what do you do to people who break the law? It raises a number of concerns, including if they end up going after state or local officials who have been outspoken in opposing the Trump administration's draconian and unlawful immigration enforcement policies. I love how they call these things draconian and unlawful, but haven't said what they've done that is either. She added the Constitution doesn't let the federal government force state and local officials to do the president's bidding in this way, but the Constitution does allow the federal government to force state and local officials to abide by federal law. Oh, by the way, appropriations laws are also federal laws, and they're written annually, every year. So I say this, you have the power right now to shut down this sanctuary policy nonsense at whatever level you want. You can defund it and make them do it on their own nickel. Or, if that's not enough, the laws are already on the books. You can indict. You can perp walk these individuals, and you can try them in federal court. Remember, these are federal crimes. They would be tried in federal court, where the conviction rates in federal court are very high. They know if they go to trial in federal court, if they get a trial date, somebody's going to plead, because you don't get out of that one. The question is, you're making threats now. Are you going to follow through on any one of them, either by cutting off money or by referring charges against those who engage in sanctuary policy? We're 1 year down. We're in a shutdown because the Democrats want people to be at risk from immigrants, illegal immigrants. This is an opportunity to make a different statement. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, California seems to be having a little trouble keeping things together. The drive to divide California and have a part of it become the 51st state, or at least another state in the Union, has surfaced again. Now, it came up again before in 2014, and there was a very wealthy gentleman from Silicon Valley who wanted to make this effort come about back in 2014. The Economist actually did a video on that, and they reported it in this way.
California cleaving. Splitting up the Golden State isn't easy. California is the most populous state in the Union, home to 1 out of every 8 Americans. It's also the richest, with a GDP of around $2 trillion. That's more than India and almost as big as Russia. There have long been calls to chop it up, most recently by a gadfly Silicon Valley investor, into areas called Jefferson, sparsely populated with tiny Redding as its largest city. Northern California, perhaps keeping Sacramento, the state capital, as its seat of power. Silicon Valley, based around San Jose. This already considers itself a land apart anyway. Central California, centered on Fresno, currently the state's 5th largest city of 500,000. West California, with LA, the biggest city, which would be the most populous of the new states. And Southern California, based around the coastal city of San Diego. 2 of the new states would be America's richest and poorest by income per person, beating Connecticut and Mississippi for the titles. Most of the others are around the American average of $44,000 a year. By population, the speculative states would range between fewer than 1 million to more than 10 million. The others are closer to the American median of around 5 million. But breaking up is hard to do. The public university system is clustered in just a handful of places. Water, always a tricky topic in the West, is most in demand where it's least in supply. And it would present electoral college problems, because it would divide one blue state into areas of red republicanism. But for the idea to fly, it needs the support of Californians, the state legislature, and the American Congress. And that, as they say, ain't gonna happen.
And indeed, that was venture capitalist Tim Draper, who back in 2014 had the idea of coming up with 6 different states to replace the current California. The new or newer plan doesn't do that. They're not looking to put this into 6 separate states. They simply are going to do 2. They are essentially taking what is mostly the blue part or the liberal part of California, with the exception, interestingly, of Sacramento. No, actually, they are leaving Sacramento. So they're taking all of the progressive part of California and saying, you guys go off and do your thing. The rest of us will go on without you. That's basically what they're saying. So the new California, as they call it, would be in land mass significantly larger than the part that's leaving behind, but the part that they're leaving behind, Sacramento, San Francisco, Salinas, Los Angeles, that is going to be the most populous of the places. Now, the video mentioned the problem with the Electoral College. It's not really a problem. It's a challenge for progressives, because as it is now, since we're not really following the Electoral College the way it should be, which should be one electoral vote for each congressional district, we kind of do it once, whoever wins the state gets everything, even if they lost in that particular area. This would now mean that whoever wins New California, which is going to be mostly Republican, it means that you just took a big chunk of electoral votes and put them in play. And that, of course, progressives are not going to want to do. Now, the idea that we have here is most interesting because it was just this past Monday, the 15th, when a Declaration of Independence was actually put into play. Complex News, a little bit offbeat organization that does reporting, talked about the proposed split in these terms.
What's up, guys? Frazier here for Complex News. Here in the U.S., we already have a New Hampshire, a New Jersey, a New Mexico, and a New York. And now soon we might add a new California to the mix if a group of California citizens gets its way. This group wants to break away from the rest of the state at some point in the near future and form what they're calling New California, which will become the 51st state in the U.S. The founders of New California read an official Declaration of Independence on Monday and everything, and in public documents, the group said it wants to move away from the original state of Cali because they believe it is currently being governed by a tyranny. After years of overtaxation, regulation, and mono-party politics, the state of California and many of its 58 counties have become ungovernable. The proposed split would see most of the densely populated coastal cities in Cali, including LA, San Francisco, and all of Silicon Valley, stay in California, while the rest of the rural part of the state would become New Cali. In an executive summary released by New California, the founders of the proposed new state argue that a, quote, decline in essential basic services available within the state has taken place in recent years. They claim many California residents are experiencing issues with education, transportation, housing, voters' rights, water resource management, and more. These New Californians say that if they're allowed to break off from the rest of Cali, they would still be the 6th largest state in the U.S. Under their proposal, they would have between 25 and 27 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. And one of the organization's founders told USA Today that while New California would like to break off from the state as soon as possible, they understand the skepticism that might surround their plans and would like to demonstrate that we can govern ourselves before we are allowed to govern. But the idea of New California actually becoming a state is considered a long shot. There have been other groups that have tried to split up California over the years, and they've been ultimately unsuccessful. There's also a portion of the Constitution dedicated specifically to this very subject. It says, new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, which seems to suggest that New California is going to have to remain a part of regular old California under the guidance of the Constitution. Now, whether or not this actually becomes a thing, social media is, as always, having a lot of fun with it. Some people have suggested that New California sounds like every bad California secession idea rolled into one, while others have pointed out that New California California sounds like it should be a new Starbucks drink or a Bad Chainsmoker song, as opposed to the name of an actual state.
So you see that this is actually being opposed. People are saying it's a bad idea. There are others who are saying that it's not legal and that you can't do this. You know, the Constitution doesn't allow you to do this. You can't set up a new state within the jurisdiction of an existing state. Really? Can someone explain to me then how it is that West Virginia came into being? Because West Virginia decided to break from Virginia at the time that Virginia was a state. Of course, Virginia had declared that it was going to secede from the Union. But how does that mean that they lose part of their state in the process? And the whole idea of trying to tell people that they must remain as part of a political union or tied together by certain political bands just because they are there, and if someone is going to leave, they don't particularly like it. Maybe you haven't read the Declaration of Independence, which begins by saying, when it becomes necessary for people to dissolve the political bands that have bound them one to another, they owe it to the world to give a reasonable answer. It's not that they can't do it, it's just we owe you a reason why. Well, by giving a declaration, the people of New California, or those who would like to be New California, have done it. Now the issue is, to what extent are you going to go to keep them from becoming their own state? Because remember, the British, who were the most advanced and dangerous and lethal military on the planet in the late 18th century, could not keep a ragtag bunch of colonists who did not even have their own standing army from forming their own nation apart from the British Crown. Remember that the United States was unable to keep 10 of its member states from seceding from the Union. They had to fight a war with them to bring them back. But let's not forget, for a few years there, they were gone. And this is what you really need to understand. The issues at stake do not matter. The only thing that matters is, do you want to live in political marriage with these people any longer? The colonists said that they were divorcing England, and they did. England fought it and lost. The Southern Confederacy said that they were divorcing the United States of America, and they did. And the United States of America fought it, and after 600,000 lives were lost, they won the right to get those 10 states back into the Union. But the issue in both cases was, we want to live according to the rules we choose, not according to the rules you choose. The same is true of West Virginia, which basically said, we do not agree with secession, and we will not go along with it. We will be separate. And Virginia did not have the ability to hold on to those people in the West. And they have remained a separate state to this day. In the case of forming the United States, violence was involved. There was a 7-year war. In the case of the Civil War, you had 4 years of military conflict. In the case of forming West Virginia, I'm not sure there was that much violence at all. They said, we're not going. And of course, Virginia had a war to fight, so how many people do you want to fight? Would it come to violence in California? I don't know. When you start talking about water rights and the fact that the coastal parts of California don't really have that much water, and that water, strange as it may seem, is inland. And for whatever reason, coastal California has not developed enough desalination plants to supply their water from the Pacific Ocean. So could you have real battles over water? You could. When I say real, I mean somebody getting hurt, somebody getting killed. But it really comes down to this. They have moved to the point beyond which people are laughing. They are trying to do this peacefully. Their next step is to seek to work with the current state legislature of California to demonstrate that they can govern themselves as opposed to being or having need of Sacramento to do things for them. Their charges against the state government of California are quite legitimate. There is no reason for the state of California to have water problems, yet they do, and that is because of bad water management coming out of Sacramento, because they value animals more than they value the welfare of people. It's really that simple. Law enforcement, did you miss what we talked about a little bit earlier involving sanctuary cities? And California has declared itself a sanctuary state. Now, I know that the progressives out there will start crying, bringing the racism charges. No, don't worry about it. The people in the rural areas of California don't really have the immigration problem. And that doesn't mean they don't have immigrants. And not all of them are quote-unquote legal. But they don't have the problems. Because the people who are showing up there are showing up to work. They have to. That's the only way anybody's getting by in those parts of the state. If you're not working, you're not eating. But you will need to be a productive member of society to live in the new California, simply because the wealth will still be on the coast, at least for a time. Because sooner or later what's going to happen is when you don't have other places to draw from, things like water, even additional revenues to the point that they come from there, then your political choices to deal with illegal immigration the way you have are going to cause a strain that is not easy for you to bear anymore. So the reason that current California doesn't want to see new California is because all of its ideological chickens would then come home to roost. They're not ready to see that right now. But for the time being, New California is plodding along slowly. And they're doing everything they can to make this an amicable breakup. Not a happy one, but an amicable one. One where it is unreasonable to resist what they are asking. But even then, the ramifications for the progressive movement in America were California to divide into two states, and from what they are saying right now, possibly take about half of the electoral votes in California with it, with at least some, if not most of those electoral votes not being essentially guaranteed to the Democrat Party. That's a problem. If it becomes, right now California's 55 electoral votes, for example, if it turns out that you have two Californias, the old and the new, and they are split 28-27, then what used to be a guaranteed 55 electoral votes for the Democrats now becomes a wash. That's a problem in a general election, because progressives do not have a message that can ever win people who are not progressives. They have no message. Neither do they have any policies that will endear them to people who do not agree with things like abortion and homosexual rights and illegal immigration supremacy. They don't have that. So stay tuned. It's an interesting thing to watch up close, as I get to do. I don't know where it's going to go, but to be honest with you, it's gotten a lot further than a lot of people would have thought. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. What is it that illegal immigration and black-on-black crime have in common? The simplest way to put this is blacks don't deal with either honestly or effectively. When it comes to black-on-black crime, blacks are 13% of the population. They're more than half of the nation's homicide victims. Just stop right there. 13% of the population and more than half of the people who suffer as victims of homicide, they're dead. More than 92% of those killed are killed by other black people. When you bring that up, blacks automatically divert to the 200 or so who are killed as a result of the use of police force. That's about 200 folks. The number of black people who are homicide victims every year numbers in the thousands. So they're straining out a gnat to swallow a camel. They don't want to deal with it. 13% of the population, according to FBI statistics, account for 28% of violent crime in America. And again, the overwhelming majority of those crimes are committed against other black people. Blacks are oppressed criminally by blacks, and instead of addressing that honestly head on, looking for a way to resolve that, blacks want to talk about white supremacy. They want to talk about the school to prison pipeline, as though any of that has anything to do with why we're committing crimes. It's just not the case. But the deflection, the unwillingness to engage, and the ineffectiveness of the engagements that we have. Don't get me wrong, we have well-meaning black people throughout the country who want to show up. They'll show up and we're going to have a march against violence. Well, that's great. So the people who commit violence either stay home while you're marching, come out and watch you march. Some of them will even go ahead and march with you. And as soon as you go home, because you will go home because you don't live there, the very thing against which you marched will continue. This should not be considered acceptable. And it should be the topic of intense discussions and intense conversation between blacks for coming up with solutions. Now, the solutions are really simple, but they don't like the solutions. The solution to all the crime and all the problems that blacks inflict upon other blacks, guys, you don't respect God and you don't respect the nuclear family. If you had regard even for the latter, that would put a dent in this. But when 77.3% of your children are born out of wedlock, when you lead the nation per capita in abortions, when you are the least married of any group in the country, how can you possibly expect to reduce the incidence of crime committed by those in your community? It's not going to work. You keep doing everything else, but you don't do the things that matter. Because there are no nonprofits, there are no government programs, there are no mentorships and volunteerism that's going to replace a family. Nor is there anyone whose rules are better, more effective, and most easily copied by the next generation than those found in the Word of God. And you rose to prominence. And blacks did have political prominence in this country, even though they were the victims of segregation and racism. They rose to political prominence in this country back in the 1950s and 1960s, totally trusting in the God of Israel, even if they didn't worship him. The civil rights movement was a church movement, and it involved black families. We don't celebrate the 4 little girls who were bombed at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Those were young black females, part of a family, and black families went to church. And it wasn't just going to be going, although I'm sure some of that occurred. We don't deal with that the way we're supposed to. Simple as that. The other thing we don't deal with very well is illegal immigration. Its pains are not necessarily as visible or as obvious or as staggering, but they have hurt the black community. And the black community is not standing up against illegal immigration in the way that it should, commensurate with the harm that it does them. T.W. Fair, who ran the Urban League in Greater Miami area for decades, spoke with Numbers USA back in 2007 on this very issue.
My name is Talmadge W. Fair. I'm better known as T. Willard Fair by those who know me. I'm the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Miami. I've been in charge of that responsibility for the last 44 years. The Urban League is one of those institutions that spends all of its time attempting to find equity and parity for black Miamians in relationship to all other Miamians. If one would do an analysis of what has happened in terms of black prosperity, both politically, socially, and economically, one would have to conclude that the presence of both legal immigrants and illegal immigrants has adversely impacted our ability to move forward. When I came to Miami, for example, way back in 1963, all of the jobs, not a few of the jobs, but all of the jobs in the hotel, motel, restaurant industry were occupied by blacks. 40 years later, all of those jobs are occupied by quote-unquote immigrants, both legal and illegal. What has happened is it's about supply and demand. Labor is about supply and demand. So if there is an employer who has one job and there are 50 people who are unemployed, then who's in control of that employer? And if 25 of those people happen to look like me and 25 of those people are illegal, then those illegals, by virtue of being here, would do anything to stay here. I'm already here. Therefore, I have certain credentials that allow me not to take those jobs. So it's not that we don't want those jobs. It's that the jobs do not pay a wage that makes any sense. There's no lack of understanding about the impact of illegal immigration on our life. What is the problem is that we don't want to violate the sociological treatise of being in partnership with other folks. We have been conditioned to believe that if we criticize others who may be in similar sets of circumstances like us, then we have betrayed the downtrodden, the disadvantaged, and the disenfranchised. So it's not about not understanding. If you talk to most black people, if not all black people, off the record, they feel as strongly, as passionately about this issue as I do. What they don't have is the courage and the commitment that's necessary to stand up and say, this is the way I feel. If you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine. I would not talk to anybody about this issue except black America's leadership. Because the ability for us to address the issue and bring about the change that is necessary rests with the courage and the commitment of today's leadership to take up the mantle and say very loud and clear, we are not anti-anybody coming to America. We are anti-people coming to America who have violated the law. We are not anti-anybody who wants to be in America. But we will not make any personal sacrifices for them to stay in America. And if Black America begins to articulate those two positions, then the problem begins to change. Numbers USA has what is needed, and that is the ability to galvanize tens of thousands of people who feel the same way about this issue, who want meaningful change in regards to public policy about this issue. And I want to be as close to Numbers USA as possible, because I hope that by my presence, I'm able to add some black numbers to the numbers.
What I took away from that, we know there's a problem, but we don't want to talk about it because we're afraid of not being in fellowship with those who also have problems. Why do we care about that? If illegal immigration is causing us a problem as black people, then deal with it as what it is. This is a violation of law that is hurting us. That needs to stop. I also note what he said concerning the turnover in jobs. He said when he came to Miami back in the early 1960s, the hospitality jobs and other service jobs were occupied by black people. And in the 4 decades that he had been there, up until the time of that particular interview, all of that had changed over to legal and illegal immigrants who are not black. And the reason was they had taken advantage, if you will, of their status to outcompete black people on the wage front. And employers could take advantage of that because, you know what, if you don't work for these low wages, then we don't have to employ you because you're not citizens anyway. And as a result, they actually parlayed their status into price competition that moved blacks out of those jobs. Now, I'm not trying to say that the jobs are great, this, that, and the other, but a whole lot of people in Miami and elsewhere throughout the United States put their children through college working service jobs in the 1950s and 1960s, before and even after. To lose that employment to those who violate the laws of the country, you think that's not a problem? Let me assure you it's a problem. Laura Ingraham also had a segment of her radio show, I believe, dedicated to illegal immigration, its impact on blacks, and this was in May of 2014.
Joining us now, Peter Kirsanow. I'm delighted he's with us. He's a member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. He's a former member of the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, contributor to National Review. And the answer to all of this, Peter, seems to be the magic immigrant. It's like whether it's Boehner or Obama or Jeb or Holder, for whatever ails us, there's a magic immigrant solution. Good to have you on.
Right. Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm good.
We've looked at this several times at the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. We actually have hard data and analyses that have come from experts and others all across the political spectrum. And what we have found is, remember the consensus on climate change, there's always these consensuses. But in any event, there is a consensus from left to right when it comes to the effect of immigration, whether it's illegal or legal immigration, on employment levels in the United States. And lo and behold, probably the members of your audience grasp this very readily as opposed to some of the post-American elites. That is that the immigration levels that we currently have a demonstrably negative effect on both employment levels and wage levels. And those effects have a more deleterious effect on low-skilled employees who happen to be black. And the reason for that is because the competition in the industry sectors where there's a large or traditional large number of black employees is most fierce in those industry sectors like agriculture, service, hospitality, and it has resulted in a decline in employment levels that is not small. We're talking about 30% of the 18-point decline in the labor participation rate among blacks is attributable to illegal immigration.
The labor force participation decline among blacks, a measurable part of that can be tied to illegal immigration. You're taking blacks out of the workforce. Illegal immigrants are keeping blacks from working. We're only concerned about illegal immigration because illegal immigrants have a wage price advantage over blacks with employers. They'll get by with less. If they're coming from countries that are not as prosperous as the United States, they're used to getting by with less. And they take advantage of that to price blacks out of the labor market. This is ridiculous that we put up with this. But then I still have black people who are supporting DACA, not realizing that it's not about families being broken up, because black families are being pressed into the ground. Black American families are of no less value than illegal immigrant families. To be sure, they should be of greater value in America to Americans. But now we have a government shutdown that is based on trying to get benefits for illegal immigrants. This hurts in some ways as much, if not more, than black-on-black crime, because you are depriving black people of the economic means, even at the lower register, to support their families and build them for the next generation. We need to stop this. We need to stop committing crimes against one another as black people, and we need to actually ask the nation to do something very basic: enforce the law. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. Look forward to speaking with you next week. In the meantime, care for yourselves and your families. And until next time, take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.